One of the best ways to learn a new opening, which I don't think gets talked about enough or done enough, is by studying games from grandmasters playing that opening. Because from looking at these games, you will start to absorb some of the middle game ideas, some of the attacking plans, kind of where to position your pieces, some of the developing ideas that you can employ into your own game. And what we're going to be doing today is doing this process of looking through Grandmaster games for the Hungarian Opening. If you'd like me to do this for a different opening as well, leave it down below. But today we're going to look at the Hungarian Opening. Now, we're not going to really talk about the theory of the opening and some of the main lines, but instead look more deeply at the middle game and some of the further ideas that you can employ. Now, if you do want to learn this opening, then I also made some videos where I do more of an opening guide where I just look at some of the main lines and kind of the first moves that you can play in this opening. So if that is interesting for you, then I'll link that down below. But let's get into some of the games. Now, one of the things that I found out actually when finding these games is that there's this grandmaster from Denmark named Bent Larsen who actually played this opening many times. He has dozens of games in this line. And so what I decided to do is pick the 3 most instructive games from him that I think really can display some really cool ideas that you can find from the Hungarian Opening. So let's get into the first game, which is, began, of course, with g3 and bishop to g2, which is the Hungarian Opening. And black takes full control of the center. One of the biggest issues that white has in this opening is white does not know how to take back control in the center. Is it c4? Is it d4? Maybe you build up something, and you're not sure how to take control of the center because you've gone for a more passive system. And that's one of the key things that you will learn from these games. And after knight f3 and knight c6 and castles and knight f6, white has really done the main moves that white wants to accomplish, which is to get the king safe. And now you want to start to attack. So c4 was played here by white, a really strong idea. Now, if they were to take, they really break up their central control. And you've already achieved something in the sense that their center is not as strong, this pawn becomes weak, and already here queen a4 seems pretty strong to me, especially considering the ideas of using this pin. If you're allowed to play knight e5 next, then that will of course open up too many attacks on this knight. You're going to be totally crushing there. So they might have to continue with something more passive like bishop d7, and then you can perhaps take on c4. And your queen's pretty active, your knight has some nice squares to develop, d3 can be played, your bishop can come out into the game as well. This is definitely nothing to complain about as white, which is why d4 is what was played here by black. Now, Larsen continued with d3. Another strong move, just solidifying the center and also making this square on e4 a nice square, and you might have ideas of moving the knight over there later on in the game. And after a5, so already here we kind of want to say, see what we do with this knight. Now Larsen obviously cannot come to c3, so that leaves d2 and a3. Now d2 maybe going to e4 later on could be an idea, but perhaps then, that would leave us with some bad pawn structures. We can try to prepare it and maybe, open up this bishop and then put the knight here. But even then, that takes a lot of moves and it doesn't focus on the right side of the board. And so here we notice another thing. With knight a3, we're looking at attacking this queen side, a common theme that you will see in this opening. This bishop here, it's a good defender on the king side, but an even stronger attacker on the queen side. And you're going to see Larsen use this idea to win many of these games. So here, bishop takes a3 is possible, and if not, then maybe the knight can jump to b5 and add some more pressure here. And maybe a4 could even come later and really solidify this knight here. There's definitely going to be some ideas with the knight jumping to b5, which is why bishop takes here definitely seems reasonable, breaking up the structure. But now the b file is open, and if your opponent allows this, as Larsen will do here, you definitely can punish them. So after they castled here, Larsen continued rook to b1, immediately taking control of this file, and again this bishop It might not seem like it right now, but it is going to come to life on this diagonal. Now rook to e8 was played here, knight to g5. The idea is to open up the bishop temporarily, but also to maybe jump the knight to e4, which is exactly what happened here. And after knight e4, if knight takes on e4, then bishop takes, and your bishop is super strong. Otherwise, maybe you're going to be threatening to take here on your own terms and then open up the bishop with tempo, which is why black retreated here, kind of not letting any of that happen. But now it's a very, very passive setup for black. Your pieces here are really nice. There's pressure not only on the queen side, but another thing we see here is that this bishop is kind of left on c1, which might seem like a weakness, but also notice Larsen might be planning some attack on h6. In this game, that never actually happens, but it's another key thing here. You don't always have to develop all of your pieces at the same time. You can, or evenly. You can also move this rook here twice before even touching this bishop, as long as you keep an eye on both sides of the board. And so here he continued with rook to b5, and that's kind of what I was talking about. Instead of developing this bishop, which would actually cut off the rook, you can make more moves with the rook, for example. Now, after rook b5, it's already a little bit uncomfortable because b6 to defend the a5 pawn, which later could be attacked with ideas of like bishop d2 and queen to a4, is obviously not possible probably because of the pressure that is here along this diagonal. And that is why here black continued with going for f5, trying to kick away the knight, and then continue with knight f6, trying to gain some more space, return the knight to a nice square. But after knight b3, e4, obviously locking up the bishop, but after takes, knight takes, and bishop b2, notice there's a lot of pressure already. Then the pawn here is under heavy fire. And also, again, you can't really have the luxury of going b6 in these sort of positions because even if there's no direct winning combination, just the weakness you create along this diagonal is going to kill you later in the game. So after knight c3, takes, black can't really go b6 here. Here it's very obvious why. And so instead, after e3 and some of these moves here, getting the queen, black needed to drop the pawn here. There was no other real way to hold on to the pawn. If the knight was, stayed here, you could take it and then take over here. And so white managed, along with the bishop, the rook, the knight, to attack the queen side really successfully. And one of the things Larsen shows here is this combination of king side and queen side pieces. The bishop here is on the king side, but it's a long range piece, so that's perfectly fine. But all of your other pieces are on the queen side, and together with the bishop, you just add a ton of pressure here. And so I think some really instructive attacking ideas here, and here it's already pretty hard to play as black. White chips off a couple more pawns, and although black does get some counterplay with these pawns here on a2, for example, first of all, really beautiful move, knight takes on f5. If they take, you drop the bishop here. You're also attacking the knight. Just really, really nice. And in the end, of course, this is totally losing. You're up a lot of material, and some nice exchanges here to get to a winning endgame. Now in game 2, Larsen again playing as white. We have g3 and the bishop to g2, and we see practically the same opening here with c4. But now bishop to e7 was played, a different move. Last time d4 was played, I already went why taking is not good. But what if simply bishop e7, a passive move trying to castle? Well then, white can take and develop the knight to c3. And after the bishop defends the knight, adds some more support, there's this really creative move d4. Because after an exchange on d4, notice the result is that this bishop becomes powerful because the knight will have to take, and after taking with the knight, the bishop will be opened up. And here after taking the knight, you can take with the pawn, solidify the center. We see e4 being played, and now knight to d2. And there's already considerable pressure on this pawn, really forcing f5. And although this locks up the bishop, that's true, it's also a very weakening move. The king is suddenly not very safe. And the bishop can also always, remember, can come to, for example, h3. It's not limited to stay on g2. It can travel as well. And so here, rook to b1, again, a similar theme of attacking with the rook. And after knight to a5, rook to b5, again, another rook to b5. Pretty funny that we see this twice. And now, after the move b6, trying to stay solid, notice already a little bit of a weakness. So that can already kind of ring your mind a little bit that maybe there's some ideas of somehow opening this up. But even without that, this is already really nice. I mean, the queen maybe can come here and come and do this x-ray at the right moment. Of course, now bishop to d7 probably will not make that possible. And there's also moves like bishop h3, like I mentioned earlier, which will add more pressure on the king side. So white definitely has all of the initiative here, and white really can try to choose how the game will continue. Rook e5 was played here. Queen to d7 to defend, and now comes a really nice sacrifice from Larsen. Knight takes on e4, pawn takes on e4. Now, why is this a good sacrifice? Well, here there's a tactical reason why this is really strong. But even if there was no tactical reason, notice that positionally, you're opening up the bishop. So always keep in mind these sacrifices, if they do go ahead and go to extreme measures like e4 and f5 to lock up your bishop, consider these sacrifices for either tactical or positional, or in this case, both, compensation. So here the tactical idea was d5, bishop moves, and now bishop to g5, taking advantage of the pin. And it's just really hard to hold here. Black ended up giving away the pawn, or the bishop, the piece back. And after this exchange of queens here, notice rook to d1. I mean, white is totally controlling here. There's already pretty damaging threats here on g7. This bishop is already coming into life on e4. It's really hard to play this accurately. Now, after this trade, bishop takes on e4. We continue with f3, solidifying the bishop on e4, which is a nice square for it because it does also add not only kind of on these weak squares here on the queen side, but it also now pressures a little bit h7. And after bishop to g6, looking to trade, bishop to d5 check, and now e5. Again, solidifying the bishop. So another idea that we're learning here is that when you place this bishop away from g2, you can definitely support it with your own pawns and kind of, in a way, make it an outpost. Now here, maybe c6 is possible in some cases, but even then your bishop can move along this diagonal, and your bishop here is just really strong. And after c6, which was actually played here, bishop a2 and bishop to e3. Black is kicking away the bishops, but while doing that, making a couple of weaknesses, like this pawn is not particularly strong, this pawn here likewise, and you know, there's going to be some issues maybe along this diagonal as well. So when you're dealing with two bishops, you might feel very good, you know, I'm kicking away all these bishops, but by doing so you are making some weaknesses. So c5, bishop to d5, taking control again of these light squares, putting the bishop now on a more true outpost because it can no longer be kicked away by a pawn. And now it continues like this. Notice totally crushing bishop to e5. Nothing that black can do here. So they resort to this, but this is of course not going to be sufficient enough. Now, black does manage to trap the bishop, but even here white finds a really smart tactical way to win, because now these pawns are really strong. And again, we end up with this endgame where you're up pawns in a winning position, and white wins this. So you're not only seeing some attacking ideas, some opening themes, but you're also seeing a pretty common endgame that you might arrive at. From two of these games already, we reached a rook endgame where you're up some pawns, and actually in both of them, you had the pawns on the king side advantage, and they maybe had one or two pawns on the queen side. Let's move on to the last and final game. Now, castling queen side against bishop g2 seems pretty unheard of. It doesn't seem like a smart choice for black, but there are cases where it's the only thing black can do, and here you're going to see how to deal with that. So Bent Larsen, again, playing as white, begins with his normal structural idea. Now, I will add, this actual opening setup of bishop to g2 and then knight to f3 against these two pawns and castles is not actually the most accurate. And these were games played a long time ago before engines, and so you will maybe want to check out my videos where I go through the opening sequences, but the ending result is going to be something like this, where they have central control, you have these pieces here, and how do you crack through the center? And again, c4 is your way in as you're learning here. Now bishop to g4 was played here, and c4 again, and this time they take. So we've already seen a couple of different options, and here they take. Now queen to a4 was played. Notice some pretty serious threats to deal with, and so queen to d7 was played, and now queen takes c4, and after f6, it's already becoming clear that black's going to castle long. Castling short here, although possible, is going to take a couple more moves from black. And also this queen, these pieces, they're very easily going to attack on the king side as well. And so castling long is understandable here. Now after d3, again, we've seen this move a number of times, just solidifying the center and looking to develop the bishop as well also on this diagonal. And e3 is actually a really nice square. It might visually seem a bit bad because it's blocking this e-pawn, but that's actually not the case because it's adding a lot of pressure, and this e-pawn is perfectly happy where it is, supporting on d3. So h4, trying to attack on the king, and this is kind of the first time where we see a true attack from black. The other two games were much more one-sided. This is starting to be double-edged. And that's the advantage, by the way, of castling queenside. When you castle queenside, you're not afraid to do this. Whereas in the other games, castling kingside, it's becoming very easy for white to find targets on the queen side, and black doesn't have as much play on the king side. And so here we see that white just plays very naturally, getting the knight to good squares and also opening up the c-file. Now after bishop to e6 here, queen moves to a4, and black ends up dropping a pawn, but notice that there might be some compensations along this f-file, and then this sacrifice on c6. So again, your bishop along range starts to add some pressure, and then you're going to get your pieces that are not your bishops onto the more close range, right? So generally speaking, your bishops on the king side attack, and your other pieces like queens and rooks, you want them to be on the king side, on the side that you're wanting to attack. Now knight takes on e3 here seems pretty smart, because otherwise this is just going to be game over with these two bishops here, and the queen, there's no chance. So black tries to take away one of the knights, one of the bishops, but then a rook to c1, ignoring the threat. And there's so many things just hanging here. It's really complicated. But white is essentially banking on the fact that, hey, there's going to be a lot of pressure here on the king side. I don't need to worry about these pieces here that don't look too safe. So knight takes on d2, and then queen takes on a7. And after this move, black resigned because there's already mate threats here. And if you take with the queen, then rook takes on c7 is mate, and there's nothing you can do here. So black ends up going for these bishops, but you were kind of using them as bait. You were just using them to distract black while you made a lot of progress on the queen side. So again, an instructive game about how you can go about positioning your bishops to just cause so much trouble to black that they're either going to have to let your bishops sit there, or if they go for them and they start to attack your bishops, then you're going to get a lot of time to attack them and checkmate them. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe if you're new around here, and I will see you next time. Peace out.